I'm Noah Abrams, and welcome to The Days Between, a show where I talk to my friends, people I admire, and people I want to better understand about success, failure, happiness, and misery, as well as all the other elements that make up a life well lived. Along the way, we'll look at mental, spiritual, and physical health, and when life didn't go as planned, the steps they took to get themselves from A to B and beyond. This week, I'm speaking with the Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper. Over the course of her nearly 50-year career in pastoral ministry, Reverend Schaper has led 8 congregations, and in almost every instance was the first woman in that position, starting at the age of 23. It was at the University of Chicago Divinity School where she connected with community organizer Saul Alinksy, helping to shape her views on leadership, as well as fueling her passion for activism, which ultimately led her to organize against the Lutheran Church when they refused to ordain women. As senior minister of New York City's Judson Memorial Church, Reverend Schaper's philosophy of bringing those outside of religion in saw her lead services for sex workers, opioid users, as well as the undocumented and non-believers. During our conversation, we discuss her fundamental trust in the goodness of the universe, the power in forgiveness, and the danger in what she calls crappy religion. Reverend Schaper's beliefs may surprise and challenge some, as they have the Me Too movement and the Coral Gables Garden Club, but her wisdom and fundamental understanding of human nature, in addition to her compassion, is undeniable. It is my pleasure to present the Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper on The Days Between. So I'm here in New York City with the Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So you have spent certainly part of your career in New York City, but you grew up in Kingston.
I was born in Queens, and I had a German immigrant family that moved me up and down the Hudson River. So half time in Queens, on half time in Kingston.
Any siblings?
Yeah, I'm the oldest of, well, there were 2, and now there's 1.
Was your family religious?
Oh, deeply, yes. We were Missouri Synod Lutherans, which is a conservative group of Lutherans. And I went to Missouri Synod Lutheran Parochial School, worshipped in German and in English. The first 2 hours of every day of my schooling was memorizing the Bible and memorizing Martin Luther's Catechism. So just ask me a question. I can even still do it, but don't, please.
I've heard you tell a story about your father and Pastor Whitty.
My father was a very troubled man, and he was, like so many, underemployed, uneducated, scared immigrants, that he took a lot of it out on my mother and was abusive. Now, I used to think that he was the only one in the whole world who was that way, but I've learned in almost 50 years of pastoral ministry that a lot of people experience that kind of violence in their homes. Anyway, when I was around 6, Daddy was beating up Mommy, and I got really scared. And furniture was breaking and lamps were going, and I called the pastor. I don't know how I used a telephone because I didn't use a telephone, but we had one of those Rolodex things where you could open it up, and on the front page were all the emergency numbers. And I called the church, and Pastor Whitty came over wearing his black vestment, and he said, "Donald, don't you ever do that again." My father stopped. He was humiliated. He was crying. He was sorry. And of course, it didn't stop it forever, but it stopped it then. And that became this fundamental trust in the universe that I have, that got represented by a man in a black robe who was a religious figure. The point is, he showed up. And I dedicated my life that day to helping little girls be safe. And I started baptizing my dolls and giving them communion. And all the rest of my large, loud, extended family said, don't go there because girls can't be priests, girls can't be ministers. And I knew what they were saying, but I thought it was still fun to do the sacraments for them.
You go from baptizing your dolls, your grandmothers told you to stop.
Right.
And then you went to college in Gettysburg?
Which is a Lutheran college also.
And then from there, you got a scholarship to go to the University of Chicago Divinity School.
Correct.
Now, how did that come about?
Well, it came about by a very strange coincidence. And of course, you have to say that feminism did it. So There was a woman named Peggy Ann Way, who was the first woman professor at the University of Chicago Divinity School. And as condition of her taking the job to teach pastoral theology, she said, I want 3 scholarships for 3 women because I don't want to teach there were 25 men in the entering class that year. And so they said, back in those days, universities were rich. You could ask for things like that and get them, and she did. And so she started calling the students who were married to see if any of their wives wanted to, because she didn't know how to recruit. And I was always the right candidate for it, but nobody knew it because I had applied to be a gym teacher, a sociologist, an English literature. I mean, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. But then Bob Schaper, my then husband, got a scholarship to the University of Chicago Divinity School in order to get out of the draft. There he was, not wanting to be there, and there I was just still, wow, I could do this. This combines all those things. So I got the scholarship, and I became the happiest person in the world, and he got severely depressed because he felt the moral injury of having escaped the draft by a kind of compromised method, to put it mildly. And I mean, a lot of other people had done that, but he was too decent not to notice that other people were going to Vietnam and being killed while he was sitting there, reading Bultmann. So that was my circuitous route to getting what my grandmother said I couldn't have.
How did you find Divinity School?
Oh, it was the most exciting thing in the world. I loved it. I loved every second of it. And I knew that meant I had a shot at being a pastor. It was mine to lose.
Now, it was also at the University of Chicago that you crossed paths with Saul Alinksy.
Yes. So it was 1970, and the people who had gone to this new Doctor of Ministry program, which was a unique thing. Usually it's not a doctorate, it's another kind of program. UC is very snobby, so they were doing something fancy. And so they recruited, I think, much to their horror, a whole class of student activists from really great places around the country. So when we got there and they were teaching us things that weren't relevant, that was our big word, you have to be relevant, and it was so corny. But we just struck. We went to the dean. We actually sang a song that embarrasses me to this day, which was, this was our theme song. So we did a sit-in in the chapel and refused to go to classes and said that the university had to completely redo our education. And that was in the first 2 weeks. And Peggy Ann Way was helping us because she got it. And these stuffy older professors had no idea what to do. I don't know if you know the name Martin Marty, but he's a famous historian of American religion, and he was the dean at the time. And he and I became very good friends. I actually babysat for his 12 children at a certain point. But we told Dean Marty, that we just weren't going to do it. It was just too stupid. And everybody was on scholarship. He just didn't know what to say. So we sat in the chapel, and we started singing, "You can bullshit any time you feel if the smell don't make you real," and to Alice's Restaurant. And we had verses, and they were critical of the professors. Well, I'm sure we're very fine people, but when I say they had no interest in relevancy, that's an understatement. So Peggy suggested that we say what we wanted to study. So we studied human sexuality, and we brought in professors, people, and we wanted to study community organizing, and we knew about Alinksy being right across the Midway. And so he came, and he recruited us. We used the whole city as our classroom. It was great.
And then you were ordained in 1973.
I was. That was also happenstance because the Lutherans wouldn't ordain me. They did not ordain women. And it happened that the 3 women who had been accepted to the university were all Lutheran. And we became great friends. And because of Alinksy, because of activism, we organized against the Lutheran Church. We said, you can't not ordain women. What is that about? So, we were in all the papers. We were on the front page of the Minneapolis Tribune, the 3 of us, wearing collars, which we weren't supposed to. And it turned out that the Lutherans that year did decide to ordain women, but not one of us was ever going to be ordained. We were going to be punished. And my home synod was in Virginia, and they just really didn't like me, and I didn't like them much either. So I figured it was bad news. Bob and I were trying to save the marriage. He had come out of this terrible depression, and he wanted to go to vet school. So once again, I sort of followed him instead of being who I am now to the University of Arizona for him to get his chemistry grade up so he could get into vet school. And when I got to Tucson, I said, I have this degree, plus I have 2 extra years, because one of the things these short, stout German bishops did to me was to say, well, we can't say directly that, but we think you need to have some more Luther. So they would pay for me to take a whole other year of Luther, or another year of this, or another year of that, as a way of delaying, thinking, well, I'd just give up. So I had extra education at their expense because they didn't know how to say out loud, women, it's about you. It's your problem. So I knew I was going to have to leave the Lutheran Church. And I wasn't sure about it because I actually remember Pastor Whitty loved Lutherans. They were my home. So we didn't have any money. I went to a department store. I got a dress that would make me look kind of professional instead of the way I usually look. And I bought earrings and had my hair cut. And I went to every church in Tucson. And I said, look, I have a really good resume. I really know how to do this stuff. I really want to be a minister. I would like to work for you for half of what you ought to pay me. And I'll do youth work. I'll do anything. And they all said no. So I returned the dress to the department store. I'd been wearing those pads so you didn't sweat in it, so I could take it back, took everything back, and realized that I was going to do exactly what I thought I was going to do when we went to Chicago, which was to work as a secretary. I was a really fast typist. And something said to me, why don't you go back to the Congregational Church? And it was a voice of some kind. And I showed up there at 8:30, not all spiffed up, but kind of distraught. And I said, I really need to see the pastor again, a man named Kendall Baker. And the secretary said, well, he's in session, and why don't you go sit with Mrs. Johnson, who's also waiting for him for his next appointment. So a woman named Winifred Johnson was sitting in the lobby. I poured out my heart to her. I told her the whole story. And when Kendall came out of his office, she said, I'd like you to meet your new associate pastor, and she'll be staffing my committees, and I'll be paying for it. And I thought, really? I mean, now I've been a senior pastor. I mean, I don't let lay people tell me who to hire, right? I said, really? And Kendall said, well, if you're going to pay for it, I suppose that's okay. She said, yes, I am. And she was a retired social worker in the Philadelphia Police Department. And she was head of the missions committee and the outreach committee. So I got the Saul Alinksy job in the church. When Bob Schaper and I went to have dinner with Kendall and Mrs. Baker, about 2 weeks later, after I got this, quote, job, I was thrilled, but I didn't know what it was or how to do it. I also didn't really know what a Congregationalist was. I didn't know what a liberal Protestant was versus a conservative Protestant. So we sit down and we're having tomato juice cocktails in these little tiny glasses with a lemon on the side. And Bob Schaper innocently says to Kendall, Nancy is in the kitchen. He said, so what do you expect from the minister's spouse? And Kendall said, he made a mistake he'll never forget. He said, oh, nothing. At which point Nancy in the kitchen took all the crockery out of the entire kitchen, broke it, and left Kendall with 5 children under the age of 10 because she was an opera singer and she was forced to sing in the choir, entertained the new hire. It was like sexism in relief. Then, so I do have this 6 years of seminary, but no experience. I don't know what a Congregationalist is. I don't know how they do liturgy. I don't know what kind of sermons they want. Kendall says, I have to take care of these 10 kids. My wife is gone. You run things. So I was running an 1,100-member church at age 23 with no experience, and it was great.
Over the course of your nearly 50-year career,
Yes.
you've had 8 different congregations.
Yes.
Majority of those, you were the first woman in that position.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How does that feel?
It feels great. And I've always been followed by a woman, too. And that feels even better.
What surprised you about people?
Well, I've already said one of the things. Because there were so few women clergy, a lot of older women would talk to us about things like incest, sexual violence, domestic violence, rape. And I was astonished at how much of it there was. Because, again, I just assumed it was us. And it turns out it wasn't. That credibility given by spiritual leaders to women to tell their story and safety, I think really opened up all the good stuff that has happened. And my first organizing project was to organize women organized against rape. We called it WAR, which basically trained police and emergency room departments to get evidence to work with women. So it surprised me how much there was, and also how remedies were readily available. Because before Women Organized Against Rape, which we started in Philadelphia and went national, before that, if you went to a cop or you went to an emergency room, people didn't know how to help you. They hadn't figured it out. And sometimes they would be very convinced that you brought it on yourself. So it was injury upon injury. So the simple act of requiring training was really huge. So I was surprised by how you could change things, and I was surprised by the depth of misery that had been unattended for women for so long.
In 2005, you took over Judson Memorial Church, where we're sitting today.
Mm-hmm.
You said of Judson, you want to find people outside of religion and have them tell you who God is.
Mm-hmm.
You have held Mass for sex workers,
mm-hmm.
for opioid users,
mm-hmm.
for the undocumented.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Judson?
Mm-hmm. Judson was, for me, I've been gone almost a year now, and I'm in a new role. I call it rewirement. But for me, Judson was just the best congregation ever. They thought I was too conservative, and every place else thought I was just ridiculously liberal. I was always in apologetic mode in all my other congregations. I even got rejected by the Coral Gables Garden Club because they were afraid I would bring in the same kind of people I was bringing into the church, and they wouldn't want that kind of person in the Garden Club. But Judson was avant-garde, was out there, ridiculously experimental. And I always said that it was like the energy from Washington Square Park would just come down in the rain and come into the building. But I remember the day that we shut the place down, March 12th, pandemic. Zach Mosley, I don't know if you know him, but he's a darling man who has every role here. He kind of does the tech, he does everything. And in a way, he was my best friend on the staff because he was here the longest, and we were always working the oddest hours. Zach looked at me on March 12th, and he said, we have to shut this place down today. And, of course, like everybody else, I thought, it'll be just a month. We'll be back in a month. And I said, sure. But walking out that day and just leaving everything on my desk, there were about 300 immigrants in the 5 small rooms upstairs from all over the world. And they were getting legal services. And there was music coming from the gym at Judson. There was a show rehearsing. And there were people dancing up in the meeting room. And I hadn't realized how full of life it was, how full of dangerous life it was at that point. And when Zach said, no, Donna, today, now, I have a child at home. We are getting out. And you're going to help me move people out. I remember thinking, my God, Zach, that's the exact opposite of what we've been doing for 15 years. We've been moving people in. We have to move them out. And it just killed me. So I love Judson very, very much.
In your 2014 book, Prayers for People Who Say They Can't Pray, you said that you have more certainty about who God is not than who God is.
Yes.
Tell me about your God.
My God lives in the belly of that 6-year-old girl who still has the same belly, just got bigger. Just a fundamental trust in the goodness of the universe, the Tao, the direction, the energy, the force. I grew up loving Jesus. Pastor Whitty came to me as Jesus because that was the only frame I had. And Jesus is definitely God to me. But I've found that I can no longer say Jesus Christ because that implies that there's one kind of God. And it's so imperial. And everything I know about Jesus is that he would never do it that way, ever. So it's been a journey from this hyper-fundamentalist girlhood, which was good, to this progressive, post-denominational. I'm writing now as the Dalai Mama. And the Dalai Mama is a combination of the Dalai Lama and Dolly Parton. And she is trying to be extremely irreverent about anybody who thinks they know what God is about. So I've taken it from that book, which is a kind of kind, good girl book. Let me help you see some of the crap that people say about God. And now the Dalai Mama is saying there is so much crap about God out there that we have to get on it and stop it. And the crap that people believe and say about God, that God is mean, that God is judgmental, that God doesn't use science, that God doesn't like women, that God doesn't like trans people. All of that stuff is so tribal and so wrong. And if I believed in judgment, which I don't, those people would burn in hell. But I think they're already so miserable that it doesn't really matter.
Culturally, do you think it's difficult for people to talk about God?
Oh, yeah. Micah Busey, who was my associate for 10 years here and became minister and is now, God bless him, suffering from long COVID. Micah preached a great sermon once. He said, I can talk about anything with my queer friends but God. I can talk about sex, masturbation, But if I start talking to them about God, they just whoop, go away. And talk of God is polluted. It's severely polluted by all the lies that are told about God and all the abuse that has been done in God's name and the wars and the blah, blah. But God is worthy of discussion in the sense if you make it kind of small and modest and simple. Howard Moody, who was the minister here at Judson for 35 years and really built the Judson hyper-use of sacred space model. And we just continued it. Howard said, don't talk to me about believing in God. That's not what God wants. Talk to me about whether you trust in God. It's a completely different thing. So I don't know that I believe in God myself. I don't do it from here. I do trust God.
Does God transcend religion?
Oh my, yes. Yes. God lives in the human genome, in the stardust that follows. God was way before there were humans and will be there way after there are humans. And religion is just a blip of controlling understandings to help people. Oh, I know what's going on here. My grandson, when he was 3, went through this state of saying, this is very serious business, Bubby. I know what's going on here. And because he got a good laugh out of it, he just kept repeating it. And he often exemplified for me exactly what people are doing with religion. This is it, the 10 Commandments. Well, why aren't there 11?
You said in a 2019 interview regarding Saul Alinksy, one of the things after a while that you had trouble with was his sexist view of power, but more specifically, the desire to create an enemy. And that in creating an enemy, it's easier to elicit change.
Right.
But you've said that that is not how Jesus or women would choose to organize.
Yes, yes.
And in such, that has gotten you into some trouble with the Me Too movement. How do we recognize victims and honor their experiences, hold perpetrators accountable, and ultimately facilitate change?
Boy, when you find out, give me a call. I don't know. But you've listed the things that have to happen. One of the most important things I ever read was by a man named John McKnight, who was a part of the Alinksy groups in Chicago way back when. And he said, keeping people in prison for a long time doesn't change them. You could keep them in prison for 2 years instead of 40, save a lot of money, and have rehabilitation that would happen. There's this notion of accountability as punishment, and accountability is different than punishment. Accountability has to do with getting to the person who did the wrong thing in such a way that they think, maybe I can change, maybe I don't have to do it again. So I'm working with a man who's a drug dealer out on the East End where I live now, of Long Island. And he's just brilliant. He's like every other drug dealer I ever knew. Superb business person. Great father. And he dealt some drugs that killed 6 people. And this latest kind of fentanyl horror. And he is deeply repentant. But he's going to go up for the rest of his life. All of his children won't see him. He'll be replaced by another drug dealer on the East End. So I want him to experience contrition and repentance and consequences. But I don't think they have to be so overdone. So that's a little bit what I feel about Me Too also. And I don't want to be in trouble with the Me Too movement with my biography. I want to be Me Too. And I am Me Too. But when you start taking away people's rights and you don't let them tell their side of the story, you create a situation where they won't find their way to the meltdown of repentance. They won't change. And they won't change others. And the only people who can change the creeps like Epstein or, pick your creep are going to be men who said, I used to do that. I used to live my life that way, trying to control you. I don't, you have to do it situation by situation. You can't make these broad generalizations. We had a pedophile here at Judson who we had to ask to leave. He was convinced that the children that he fondled on this property wanted him to do that. It's horrifying. And a lot of people here worked with him on that, as opposed to saying, no, you're too horrifying. You just, get thee hence, Satan. Let's demonize you. Let's throw you out. Let's exclude you. He remains a human being, even though he did those bad things. And he was prohibited from being here. We said all the time, all people are always welcome here. All behaviors are not always welcome here. So that's a little piece of it.
What's the power in forgiveness?
The power in forgiveness is the power of loving what is ugly. And I think the reason Jesus is so important is that he refused to have an enemy. And when we refuse to have an enemy, we are likely to find something of ourselves in the person we're condemning. So much of crappy religion is this superiority. I'm good. You're not. Well, that's just not true. And Jesus often said that self-righteousness was the only thing you can't forgive. So what about saying out loud, yeah, I did that. Can you forgive me? But you can't build trust that's not there, you know.
You've said that the biggest sin is indifference.
Yeah, I think indifference comes from meaninglessness, hopelessness, isolation, the sense that there's no purpose in the universe, that it's not going anywhere but to hell. And indifference is, I have an anger management problem. I'm like a lot of people. I have a good, solid anger management problem. And having that problem is the direct result of how much I love things. The only solution to my problem was be indifference, and indifference is not the opposite of love. Anger is the opposite of love. I get mad because I really know how good things can be. Indifference, that not caring, I'm really worried that if we don't solve the current red-blue problem around the masks, around the Trumpers, around the notion that they're the victim, the way they game everything to turn themselves into the victim, that we will be looking at a kind of Nazi-esque situation. I'm really scared about that. But so many people have just decided to be indifferent to it. Just nothing I can do about it. That's the way he is. That's the way my cousin is. So that indifference gives them freedom. So I like it when people step up to the plate and counter even the little hates, the microaggressions, because that shows that they care.
You've said in regard to prayer that you don't have to buy the whole package to get a little assurance from the sacred.
I call prayer the art of pause. And sometimes prayer, as Annie Lamott says so beautifully, is just please, thank you. That's really all it is, courtesy towards the divine. And when we pause to think, to experience, to say, he just hit her. I'm on the corner, and he just hit her, Take it in and then experience it can be, it's like saying, oh my God, right? We say it all day long. Oh my God. Oh my God. We say it all day long. That's a prayer. And people who think they have to pray right drive me crazy, right? You don't. You just don't.
Part of your job is to see people out of this world and end-of-life situations.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found any common themes or lessons throughout that?
Yes. It's been such a privilege to stand by while death happens and to become less afraid of it as a result. Most people die peacefully. Their experience of grief is that they're going to miss the beloved who's with them. It's not being afraid of where they're going to go. The cliche is very true that most people are scared to death of pain, but not of dying. Because nobody's come back to tell us what it's like, ever. So we don't know. I've started doing ashes to ashes, stardust to stardust at the end of all my services because of the science, because there is truth that the world began in this gaseous dust, and that every gene that's ever been is out there floating around someplace. That's as good an idea of eternity. That's all I need. I don't want to think that we're nothing. I find that a little scary. After all this self-importance, you'd really think we get something out of it. But I love this idea that we're in this vast universe shining. My kids we wanted to have an end-of-life talk with my 3 adult children, and they avoided it completely. every time we were scheduled to have this is what I want, advance directives, this is where the will is, this is what's going to happen. This is the book with all the passwords in it. Every time my husband and I wanted to do it with them, I can't come. And I finally realized after about 3 years of this, when we all lived in New York, I realized, they're scared of it. How did I create kids who are scared? And my daughter, who's always so honest, said, well, yeah, I just don't want you to die. And I was kind of flip about it. And I said, well, good for you, because, then I won't. And she got really mad. She said, you're just not taking it seriously. And I said, well, Katie, here's the deal. I'm not taking it seriously. I don't personally take it seriously. And I've seen a lot of people who are relaxed about it. That's been the gift.
How do you define success?
Goofballing. I love goofballing. And goofballing is a day or an hour or a weekend off the clock, doing whatever I feel like doing next. It's often work. I don't like clocks. And by goofballing, I mean enjoying things, finding the humor in them, being amused. And that includes being amused by people who are yelling at each other about masks. I have a little congregation in Orient right now. Big fight last week about the people who are very concerned about the virus wanted to have reservations for the Christmas Eve service when we knew the little place would be packed. So we could do contact tracing, and so we could limit the number of people. The other side didn't. You would have thought that somebody was murdering somebody. So much anxiety. So when you spend your time goofballing, the one thing is you're not anxious about anything. I don't like anxiety. And so I just left. I said, oh my God, I've got to go. And they said, what? You're not going to solve this? I said, no. I'm not going to get anywhere near it. Well, do you have an opinion? Yes, I do. Well, we know what it is because you're a liberal. I said, well, good. It's just, success is remaining free of people's projections about crappy religion and crappy leadership and creating open space for people.
How do you define failure?
Missing the mark of my true humanity, my God-given humanity, and becoming small and stupid and controlling, anxious.
Looking back on your life and your career, can you see a failure that ultimately set you up for success?
My biggest problem has been an almost ideological interest in not controlling situations. And that has made me a weak leader sometimes. People have just gotten mad, I'm sitting in this room. We had Occupy here for 2 years. This room was packed to the gills with people who had been living at Zuccotti and then came up here and lived when they got evicted, 4 a.m. And I was in charge, and I should have thrown them out. Because once we let them be here for 2 or 3 weeks, it was almost impossible to throw them out. And there were a lot of mentally ill people who were at Zuccotti, and there were a lot of just brilliant people. And so this was a failure. My democratic, small d democratic stuff was not working, and I didn't know how to be stronger. I was just ideological about it, and it hurt people. There was more harm done than there should have been. Is there a success in there someplace? It certainly helped my teaching about what leadership is. To say, sometimes you have to break out of that. You can be so much against masculine leadership that you refuse to do it under any circumstance. That's dumb. That's a dramatic story about a pattern that I have, which I mostly like, but I have had to learn a lot about it. And now if I were to say the one thing I'm really worried about is that climate change and the virus are going to require levels of authoritative leadership, if not authoritarian leadership, because otherwise we're going to just sacrifice a lot of people. And it's already going on. Inaction on climate is sacrificing people. The failure to be able to develop a consensus around the vaccination is killing people. So how do you balance what I call education for democratic behavior, participation in democratic behavior, and work at it all day long, with the need for authoritative, which you haven't built the consensus. How do you do it? That's really troubling. So, hate to end on a bad note, but that's what's, I think there's some failure. There's a lot of failure to go around there.
How do you define happiness?
I read a book about parenting. When I was first a parent, I was convinced I was going to be a terrible parent, and I was in certain ways. But the book said, if you'll just be amused by your children, it will go better. And I define happiness as the capacity to sustain amusement.
What would you say to 18-year-old Donna?
Don't screw around so much. You could have gotten pregnant. As my mother always said.
How would you describe what you do for a living?
Oh, I set up tables. Take them down. Put them back up. Chairs, tables. It's Eucharistic. And I have a harder time setting up tables. Some of the tables are really heavy. At my new church, I've got to get new tables that are lighter, like we did at Judson.
Reverend Schaper, thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
The Days Between is a production of Noah Abrams Studio. Story editing by Andrew Henry. Mixing and mastering by Mai Ikoshima. Website and design by John Fisher. Theme music is by Evo. The Days Between can be found online at www.thedaysbetweenpodcast.com and on Instagram at The Days Between Podcast. My name is Noah Abrams. Thanks for listening.